is one of the most famous ships in human history. A vessel so grand, so powerful, and so celebrated that the men who built her genuinely believed she could never be destroyed. And yet, on a cold April night in 1912, she sank to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, taking more than 1,500 lives with her in under 3 hours. But here's what most people don't know. The iceberg was not the only thing that killed the Titanic. The ship was already on fire before she ever left port. The man who owned her canceled his own ticket days before departure, and the vessel sitting just miles away, close enough to save nearly everyone aboard, did absolutely nothing. This is not just the story of a ship that sank. This is the story of human arrogance, class warfare, hidden secrets, and a tragedy so devastating it changed the world forever. This is the entire history of the Titanic. By the early 1900s, crossing the Atlantic Ocean had become a fierce commercial battle between the most powerful shipping companies in the world. Britain's White Star Line, owned by American banking titan J.P. Morgan, was losing ground to its great rival Cunard, whose ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania, were faster than anything White Star could offer. So White Star's chairman, J. Bruce Ismay, made a decision. They would not compete on speed. They would compete on scale, on luxury, on sheer overwhelming size. In 1907, the plans for 3 colossal sister ships were drawn up: the Olympic, the Titanic, and the Britannic. They would be the largest moving objects ever built by human hands, and Titanic, the second to be constructed, would be the crown jewel. Construction began on March 31st, 1909, at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. At its peak, 15,000 men worked on her simultaneously. She stretched 882 feet long, nearly 3 football fields end to end, and rose 9 decks high. Her 4 smokestacks were so large that 2 London double-decker buses could pass through each one side by side. She was, by any measure, a marvel of the modern age, and the men who built her were so confident in her design that she was marketed and genuinely believed to be unsinkable. But deep inside her hull, in the bowels of the ship, something was already going wrong. Before the Titanic ever left Belfast, a fire broke out in coal bunker number 6, one of the giant storage chambers that fed the ship's boilers. Coal fires were not unheard of in ships of that era, caused by the spontaneous combustion of tightly packed coal. But this one was different. It burned for almost 3 weeks before the ship departed. A 12-man crew worked in rotating shifts to fight the blaze. They could not extinguish it. The fire burned at temperatures reaching nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough, metallurgy experts would later confirm, to reduce the strength of the surrounding steel hull by as much as 75%. And here is the detail that changes everything. The section of the hull that was weakened by this fire sat directly behind where the iceberg would later strike. Irish journalist Senan Molyneux, who spent 30 years investigating the disaster, discovered photographs taken by Harland and Wolff's own engineering chief before the ship departed. In those photographs, a dark 30-foot mark can be seen scorched into the hull, at the exact location of impact. The White Star Line knew about the fire. They chose to sail anyway, and not a single passenger was ever told. On April 10, 1912, the RMS Titanic departed Southampton, England, on her maiden voyage to New York City. She carried 2,224 people aboard, passengers and crew, and the contrast between their experiences could not have been more stark. First-class passengers dined in rooms that rivaled the finest restaurants in London and Paris. They had access to a swimming pool, a gymnasium, a Turkish bath, and a grand staircase beneath a glass dome that has since become one of the most iconic images in history. Their tickets cost the equivalent of $100,000 in today's money. Third-class passengers, many of them immigrants fleeing poverty in Ireland, Eastern Europe, and Scandinavia, were confined to the lower decks in small, shared cabins. Their quarters were separated from the rest of the ship by locked gates, placed there by law to comply with American immigration health regulations. Among those aboard were some of the wealthiest people on Earth. John Jacob Astor IV, worth the equivalent of $2 billion today, Benjamin Guggenheim of the mining dynasty, and Isidor Straus, co-owner of Macy's department store, who refused to board a lifeboat without his wife Ida. When offered a seat, she simply replied, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Notably absent, however, was the man who owned the entire operation. J.P. Morgan had booked his own private suite on the Titanic, but canceled his reservation days before departure, citing health concerns. He was later photographed in perfect health on the French Riviera. By Sunday, April 14th, the Titanic was 4 days into her crossing and steaming at close to full speed. Throughout the day, wireless operators received multiple ice warnings from nearby ships. The messages were delivered to the bridge, noted, and largely ignored. Captain Edward Smith, 62 years old and on the eve of retirement, did not reduce speed. He had sailed this route dozens of times and trusted his experience over the warnings. At 11:30 that night, the temperature on deck plummeted. Most passengers had already retired below. High above the ship in the crow's nest, lookouts Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee stared into an unusually dark ocean. There was no moon that evening, and critically, the ship's binoculars had been accidentally left behind in Southampton. At 11:40 p.m., Frederick Fleet saw something materialize out of the darkness directly ahead. He rang the warning bell 3 times and grabbed the telephone.
"Iceberg right ahead."
First Officer William Murdoch ordered the engines reversed and the wheel hard to starboard. For 37 seconds, the ship turned. And then came the sound, not a crash, but a long, low scraping, as the iceberg ran along the starboard side, buckling the steel plates and popping the rivets along 5 of the ship's 16 watertight compartments. Thomas Andrews, the ship's architect who was aboard to monitor her performance, inspected the damage and delivered his verdict to Captain Smith within the hour. The Titanic could survive 4 flooded compartments. 5 were now taking on water. She would sink in approximately 2 hours. There were lifeboats on board for 1,178 people. There were 2,224 people aboard. More than half would have no means of escape, regardless of what happened next. The order to load the lifeboats went out at 12:25 a.m. Many passengers, unaware of the true danger, initially refused to leave the warmth of the ship for the dark, cold ocean below. The first lifeboat launched carried only 27 people. It had a capacity of 65. Meanwhile, just 10 miles away, a ship called the Californian sat motionless, stopped for the night due to ice. Its wireless operator had switched off his equipment and gone to sleep minutes before the Titanic struck the iceberg. Crew members aboard the Californian watched as rockets fired into the sky above a distant vessel, debated amongst themselves what they might mean, and took no action. By 2 a.m., the ship's bow was fully submerged and the stern was rising into the air at a terrifying angle. The lights flickered and went out. The band, all 8 musicians, had been playing on deck since midnight, performing waltzes and hymns to keep the passengers calm. Every one of them stayed at their posts. Not one survived. At 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic broke in 2 and disappeared beneath the surface, descending over 12,000 feet to the ocean floor. Over 1,500 people were left in water so cold that survival was measured in minutes. The survivors in the lifeboats could hear the screaming. Slowly, it faded to silence. When the RMS Carpathia arrived at 3:30 a.m., she rescued 712 survivors. Of the roughly 329 first-class passengers aboard, 62% survived. Of the third-class passengers, only 25% made it out alive. The disaster shocked the world and triggered sweeping changes to maritime law, mandatory lifeboat capacity for all aboard, 24-hour radio watches on all passenger ships, and the creation of the International Ice Patrol, which continues to monitor North Atlantic icebergs to this day. The wreck of the Titanic lay undiscovered on the ocean floor for 73 years. When American oceanographer Robert Ballard finally located her in September 1985, he revealed something else entirely. His expedition had been funded by the United States Navy, who needed a cover story to secretly inspect two sunken nuclear submarines, USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, lost during the Cold War. The Titanic search was the alibi. He had only 12 days left after completing the Navy's mission to find her. He succeeded. And in 2023, the Titanic claimed 5 more lives. The OceanGate Titan submersible, carrying tourists to view the wreck, imploded at depth after its CEO had dismissed repeated safety warnings from engineers and experts for years, insisting his vessel was safe, that the risks were overstated, that he knew better. The official U.S. Coast Guard investigation concluded the disaster was entirely preventable. 111 years later, the same arrogance that built the Titanic had killed again. The Titanic was not destroyed by an iceberg alone. She was destroyed by the absolute certainty that she could not be destroyed, by the fire that was hidden, by the warnings that were ignored, by the lifeboats that were never filled, by the ship that watched and did nothing, and by a system that, when the moment of reckoning came, saved the wealthy and left the poor to the sea. She sits today at the bottom of the North Atlantic, slowly dissolving, taken apart by the ocean, piece by piece. Scientists estimate she will be completely gone within a century. But the story she left behind, of ambition, of hubris, and of the cost of believing you are beyond failure, will not disappear with her. It never does.